Thank you, Raji. It's a great honor to moderate the first UNAN's discussion forum on our ocean and a sustainable marine economy in New Zealand at the start of the decade of ocean science. I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker of the evening, Dr. Carolyn Lundqvist, who will tell us about her research on marine socio-ecological systems and biodiversity conservation. Carolyn holds a joint position as principal scientist in marine ecology at the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research in Hamilton and as associate professor at the School of Environment at the University of Auckland. She's an applied marine ecologist, providing scientific and social scientific input to inform decision-making for coastal and ocean management at local, national, regional and international scales. She leads two projects for the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge that are developing marine spatial planning tools to improve management of cumulative impacts in New Zealand's ocean ecosystem. Other recent projects include management of mangroves and other coastal wetland habitats, reviewing impacts of climate change on the seafood sector, and the development of global biodiversity scenarios for the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Welcome, Carolyn. The floor is yours.
So thank you, everyone, and welcome. I just wanted to welcome everyone also on behalf of the New Zealand Ocean Decade Committee. This is a UNESCO committee that formed late last year, and a number of you hopefully were also at an event that we just hosted on Tuesday at Parliament. And so one of the things, possibly we'll be able to share my slides around so that you can see them, but one of the things that we're quite proud of that our committee, on behalf of our UNESCO Secretariat in New Zealand, they put together this fantastic website that's showcasing marine science in New Zealand, as well as a lot of the marine science close to New Zealand, so within the Ross Sea as well. And a lot of this actually connects directly to the theme of this webinar and presentation tonight about the sustainable blue economy. So what within the website, we've got, I think, two links that work. One is oceandecade.org.nz, and the other one is the name of the website, Aotearoa.org.nz. So hopefully those links should both work, and they both went live on Tuesday night at this event we hosted at Parliament, which was quite exciting. And it does have a link right now to 47 different projects on marine science in New Zealand, and both a brief summary of each of the projects, as well as some links to the actual project websites and researchers if anyone is interested in contacting them and learning more. And quite a number of these are about what the new blue economy could be. So we have highlighted some projects both on sustainable fisheries technology, also on what new aquaculture could be in New Zealand, and all sorts of new innovative ideas of transforming the blue economy in New Zealand. And then I think what the title of my talk was today was more about protecting biodiversity and livelihoods. So how do we actually do that within a sustainable marine economy? And one of the other projects that a number of us in Aotearoa, New Zealand, are involved in within the United Nations work is within IPBES. And I suspect many of you have probably never heard of IPBES, but you've probably heard of IPCC. That's our climate change intergovernmental platform. That's one of the UN bodies that does these big assessments every few years about climate change. So what are the pathways and the future scenarios that we're going to have for climate change in the future? And you're probably all quite familiar with all those lovely little lines that showcase if we go on this pathway, our sea level rise is going to be this many centimeters, and if we have a greener, more sustainable pathway, we might have less sea level rise, and temperature and other things that are associated with these different climate change scenarios. Well, what I work with within this UN body is IPBES, which is the Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And we have a very similar role, but looking at biodiversity, or what is the future for nature? So what is our global, as well as our regional and our national within New Zealand future for nature, and how are we going to come up with different positive futures of what we actually want. And so I'm very much looking forward to a number of government documents that should be coming out in the near future. And we just had the release of the Climate Commission report, I believe that was yesterday, and in the very near future looking forward to the National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity. And so within these, we have a number of very exciting and transformative changes, certainly on land. Most of you have probably heard of predator-free New Zealand, and that's quite an innovative or transformative change scenario. So how would nature look like in New Zealand on land if we got rid of mammalian predators, our stoats and rats and things? But then what if we take these transformative concepts about different ways of valuing nature and what type of nature we want and bring it to our oceans? So the group that I work within in the IPBES group, this Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services group, is we're developing new global scenarios for nature. And these are centered around different values that we each have for nature. So most of you will probably be familiar, but possibly not with a lot of the concepts. Our social science community often refers to these as intrinsic and instrumental and relational values. I like to call them nature for nature. So that intrinsic value of nature, we value nature for being there, for being what it is, for knowing that we can see penguins in the south, polar bears in the far north of the earth, and everything in between, our coral reefs, just knowing that all of this is there, knowing that species aren't going extinct, and that general protection and preservation of indigenous biodiversity. And having scenarios that are based on protecting nature itself lends you a very kind of specific types of management actions that you would be doing, whether it's looking at different types of marine protected areas where we're banning extractive uses, and also lots of different types of technologies that are trying to minimize environmental impact. So these are things that we can take for our transformative scenarios and bring them into models of what the future might be like and how, what kind of difference these different strategies would make. We also have two other potential kind of main pathways or scenarios that we have in there. And one is looking at nature for society. So many people will have heard of ecosystem services as a term. So these are what are the benefits that nature brings to us as humans or as society. And so we know that nature or our oceans provide oxygen for us. We know they have a major role in carbon cycles and carbon sequestration. I do a lot of work up in the North Island here on mangroves and the role of mangroves and seagrass and salt marsh and storing carbon within the sediments of our oceans so that it's sequestered or taken out of that atmosphere where we have increasing levels of CO2. So we know that our oceans do have that huge value of what they provide for us as people. And so we can have scenarios that are built around trying to maximize those values for nature. And then we have a third, and I have some great pictures for you. So hopefully we will get to share these graphics that a colleague of ours, Mary Brake, who's a graphic illustrator, has done for us, trying to showcase what these different scenarios like. But the third concept, or the third type of value that we talk about is relational values. And in New Zealand, we tend to be far more familiar with these types of values than potentially a lot of other places because we do have such a strong role of our indigenous Maori culture in New Zealand. And so this is fantastic for us where we actually do very much recognize, for example, if we were giving our introduction of ourselves, we often start with our river, our mountain, going through that whole genealogy or whakapapa till we get to the introduction ourselves. So we recognize the connection of ourselves as an individual going all the way back through your genealogy, through to your native river and mountain and your, basically your nature family. And so there's that interconnectedness of humans within a cultural landscape or within the way we value nature as something that's not separate from us, from people. And so these three different types of nature values are what we've built this new global biodiversity scenarios framework about. And it's quite exciting because it's a very new thing, so building on work that's going on with the IPCC and our climate change scenarios. And this actual government plenary begins on the 14th of June. So we will be also presenting the work of the task force there, as well as at the next plenary that comes up in early 2022. So I think I may stop.
Nick is an economic geographer and associate professor in environment at the University of Auckland. He's exploring the creation of a blue economy in New Zealand, and he is a theme leader of the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge. He's committed to building innovative conceptual and methodological platforms and transforming current understanding and performing of economic practices through a collective social process. It's a pleasure to have you here, Nick. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm looking at the camera away from you, so this might be a bit strange. And I have new respect from Carolyn in terms of being able to deliver all of that without their visuals. I will try and do it as well. Thank you very much for having me to talk to you this evening. And really what I want to do is communicate, I guess, 2 or 3 messages about some of the work we're doing at the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge that leads us to think about economy in a different way as almost a fundamental step in transitioning to a more healthy relationship with our seas, a relationship that builds things economic into a longer term, more sustainable set of relationships with community and with the ecology of the oceans and the coastal areas. So those kinds of messages are, I think, 1, that we have to think about economy differently. 2, that we, in so doing, we think about how things economic are bound into things social and things ecological, in the very notion of what is a resource as well as the use of resources. And the third is that if we are thinking in this new way about what constitutes a blue economy, then we have to think seriously about how to transition towards that blue economy. That transitional process is not going to happen by itself. So those are the kinds of 3 messages that I'll leave you with. I will try and run through the slides at a distance and maybe make some of the points that underline that particular argument. The first point is the incredible turn to discussing things, to discussing oceanic futures in terms of this discourse of the blue economy. This is a term that was not part of popular or even academic parlance 10 years ago. It's now been, you now see it everywhere. So this sense of what a blue economy is, what the use of the term is all about, is something that should preoccupy us, I think, before we contribute to those kinds of conversations. So you can see the use of the term blue economy by the United Nations, by the World Bank, by the EU, by various organisations in the global south. You can see it used at a national level. You can see it used at a local level, and you can see it used to support a whole range of different arguments with respect to how we should engage with oceanic resources into the future. But I think that what it does is it constitutes what I've been calling a blue economy moment. And if you go to all of the uses of this particular term, I think you can extract from those different uses a number of, if you like, key themes associated with the use of the term blue economy. The first of those themes might be that the oceans are now being seen as a zone or a space of ecological concern. And I think that's an important underlying thematic, if you like, in the use of that term. The second is a recognition that the oceans are central to humanity's needs and at the same time a source of economic opportunity. But that realising opportunities requires investment, it requires science, it requires new socio-ecological knowledge, and it requires new forms of regulation, new forms of governance. And it also requires And I think this is written into just about all of the discussions around blue economy, maybe not those at the far end of the spectrum who see the oceans as a new source of a gold rush to mobilizing resources and capitalizing on them and generating new economic growth and so on. But in most uses of the term, there's a sense that we need to be thinking about ecologically, culturally, and socially sustainable transitions, and that transitioning will not happen by itself. At the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge, we've recognized this particular moment. We're trying to think about things economic in relation to theorizing a way in which and developing tools for agencies around ecosystem-based management. What kind of economy does ecosystem-based management presuppose, and what kind of economy can be encouraged into this world of ecosystem-based management? So a blue economy then is made up of marine activities, this is how we have chosen to define it, that generate economic value and contribute positively to social, cultural, and ecological well-being. I think the term "and" in there is an important one. So when we're trying to shift the discussion away from within limits into a different kind of space. We did some research over the last 4 or 5 years that told us that there are a range of what might be called blue economy stirrings in New Zealand, a range of foundations upon which we might rethink notions of blue economy and encourage a different form of economy for an EBM. These include the use of sustainable technologies in volume production around seafood. They include a range of small-scale initiatives in ecotourism, seaweed, marine circular economy, and we'll hear about one of those sets of initiatives later this evening. There are blue biotech initiatives, there are innovative regulatory approaches associated with sea change, with Te Aotearoa in Kaikoura and other places. We've seen new commitments to value-added and green certification, and we've seen a great growth in what might be termed Māori blue economy. Māori enterprises, Māori-owned entities, developing different economic models in relation to ocean resources. So one of the things that our first round of research did was suggest that we need to find new concepts, new categories for thinking.
Recording in progress.
Sorry. Oh, what I'm saying is still captured. But our standard ways of measuring and accounting for economy are not going to deliver for us what we need if we want to transition to something very different. So we've been thinking about bracketing out money, commodity, new technologies, foundational economies, community economies, and then going out and finding a set of initiatives that are at work in the New Zealand context in each of these spaces. And we've been able to find a vast range of these kinds of initiatives, and Tony and Claire will talk about accuracy as one of those. From the first phase of our research, the Sustainable Seas has been organised into 2 phases. We're through the first phase and we're into the second phase of that research. We built a blue economy development model that you can have access to through the Sustainable Seas website, where really we centred the idea of a future economy that's different around the notion of a blue economy that is indigenised. And that indigenised blue economy would direct significant attention to aquaculture, to ecotourism, to blue tech, to restorative forms of economy, and wrap those up in different governance models and different ethical coordinates, different commitments, different rates of return, different conceptions of what resources could be used for. And you're welcome to look at that model online. So what I think that research has left us with is a set of material resources to do transitioning. There are New Zealand enterprises embracing our notion of a blue economy, doing things differently. There are government agencies that are committing to participatory and EBM approaches and to just transitions. There are opportunities to create new blue economy values, so to actually mobilise resources in different ways that will produce various different sorts of value return, including financial bottom lines. And perhaps the leading resource at our disposal is that Māori economy is leading the way towards a blue economy. And I think we identified a range of transition possibilities that could be connected to these, if you like, material resources that I've just talked about. And those possibilities include embracing a holistic understanding of economy, maybe drawing on Māori conceptions of economy to do that, recalibrating policy and investment across all circuits of activity, working out using EBM approaches to manage economy to facilitate transitions, so new technologies, new regulatory processes, new participatory decision making, and so on, as configuring these possibilities. We thought about, and then we built our BE development model. So we've got the transition possibilities and a set of resources that we can work with. And to that end, to finish off, tell you a wee bit about some of the projects that we've funded in phase 2 of the challenge, based around what we've learned in phase 1. And we've funded 4 core projects, the first of which is, oh, outside. Oh, I thought someone had told me to shut up. The first of our four projects is titled Encouraging Restorative Economies in New Zealand Marine Spaces. Maybe Fraser may refer to that project a wee bit in what he has to say. But essentially, the aim there is to stimulate investment in and create enabling environments for restorative economies in New Zealand. Those are economic activities that are created either through the conservation, restoration, regulation, or mitigation processes, and that combine business with environmental restoration. The second of our projects is called Indigenising the Blue Economy in Aotearoa, and that is really looking at questions of how might you indigenise New Zealand's blue economy? What does an indigenised blue economy look like, and how will we transition to it? And identifying the opportunities to do that, including what kinds of indigenous processes, structures, institutions, technologies, and so forth can be brought into play to drive our use of marine resources in the future. Third project is growing tourism in a blue economy, where the objective is to think through what marine ecotourism-led economic futures would look like in New Zealand, what community-led ecotourism-based economies might look like. And the fourth of our projects looks more like the conventional economic development project, which is really to think through how one might build a blue economy sector with a focus on seaweed. So at a time when investors are lining up to invest heavily in seaweed, and we don't quite know enough for people to press the button to go, there are significant uncertainties and business risks associated with that. What kind of science knowledge, what kind of regulatory processes can we put in place to ensure that when that investment does pour in, it pours in within ecosystem-based management principles, so that from the get-go, we organise the sector in a fundamentally different way. I think that's enough for me, but feel free to go to our website to find out more of what we're about, and maybe there'll be a bit of a discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's like incredible what's happening already in the first 2 phases of the Science Challenge. Just Fraser Story is a blue economy, environment, and marine specialist who works as a project manager at Envirostrat. Fraser, we're looking forward to hear more about your work.
Thanks, Courtney. A bit of work to katoa, everyone. Corporation taku ingoa. As what you just introduced me, I'm project manager here at Envirostrat. We're based up here in Auckland. I'd just like to first acknowledge the other attendees over Zoom and speakers today. I actually studied under both Nick and Carolyn, so it's quite cool to be able to present alongside you here. And then I have the fortune of knowing the great people at Agri, Tana and Claire as well, so good to see you all tonight. Just a little bit of background about myself. I have a marine science background. I completed my Masters at the University of Auckland, and I spent some time working in both charitable trusts and at NIWA, up at the Bream Bay facility. I've been with Restorative now for about 3.5, 4 years, and as I've introduced, I'm a project manager now on a variety of different initiatives. So just a bit of background to what Restorative does. As I said before, we're based in Auckland. We're a transdisciplinary impact consultancy and investor working in the sustainable natural resource sector. So what that kind of means is we actually try and take the project concept through to implementation. It's all very well and good, doing the consulting side, but actually a lot of the fun stuff really happens when you can implement it. So that's what we've kind of done with our team. We've positioned ourselves that we want to, potentially take equity and see these projects through to completion with partners, which is, I guess, part of the attraction for me joining the group. Increasingly, we find that a lot of our projects are based in the blue economy space, which is really awesome. And part of what I'll touch on is how that links into projects that are co-developed with Indigenous, and we work with Indigenous groups both in New Zealand and overseas, and I'd say probably 70% of our projects now actually have iwi involvement, which is awesome, and they make really, it makes it a really rewarding process working alongside them. So in the blue economy space, it is quite challenging in New Zealand, but it's also rewarding. In terms of challenges, I think policy inertia and social license to operate are continual themes that crop up across all of our projects, often with local context influencing each one. But in saying that, there's also heaps and heaps of cool opportunities here and abroad, particularly I think in the blue to green space, so looking at how the marine-based projects cross over into what we do on land. Looking at climate change rather than a constraint, actually as an opportunity, and what that unlocks. And Tana and Claire can absolutely talk more about that later on. The circular economy is obviously pertinent across all sectors of the economy, and blue economy is absolutely part of that. There's so many opportunities that we see in that space that are really exciting, and actually, compared to others which are completely novel, they're low-hanging fruit options in terms of the sectors that we already have operating. And another key point that I'd raise as well is we've seen the emergence of non-traditional investors, so groups that would look to fund things or wouldn't have looked to fund things in the marine space prior to recent years, but are now seeing projects through a different lens that actually attract them in different ways. So by unifying the motivations of different investors, we're seeing a greater diversity of people getting involved in these blue economy projects. So at Restorative, we kind of seek to balance a variety of elements, and whether or not it's an emerging industry or it's an established one, and we look to balance the challenges and opportunities to seek a pragmatic solution. Often that requires meeting the needs of many. It's very rare that our projects seem to be one entity or one organisation. There tend to be many in that regard. And so we really focus on finding a stepwise solution that will take us in the right direction, as opposed to just leaping there in a single bound. I just thought I'd provide a few really quick examples of projects that we're currently doing now that demonstrate that scientific and social cultural innovation, just so you can get a bit of a flavour for it. But first is a program called Kayika. You may or may not be aware of it already. It was initiated by Legacy, the recreational fishing lobby group, about 5 years ago. And essentially it's all about reutilising or saving waste fish that would otherwise be lost. So it's taking, offering a service in which recreational fishers can get their fish filleted at a cost, and it can raise money through that angle, and it provides seafood, healthy seafood to communities in South Auckland currently, and that's delivered through maraes such as Aotearoa in South Auckland. So essentially that became a really critical supply of food, high quality food product during COVID. And so there's a fundamental philosophy of actually, hey, this is now not a nice to have, but it's shifted into a really critical social and environmental initiative in South Auckland. And so what they asked us to do is to help them scale this so that it can shift into a self-funding model without compromising those fundamental philosophies of how can we look after our people, how can we deliver good quality food, and minimise our waste. So really it's actually it's quite interesting in terms of New Zealand context. We often don't assume that access to food is a problem. There's a general assumption that it's there for everybody, but really this particular project's a food poverty play with a bit of an environmental twist. You're securing important protein for people, but you're also maximising the use of your fisheries. So it's quite cool. Another one is a regenerative ocean farming project that we're kicking off, and I'm really stoked to say that Tane and Claire at Aotearoa are part of that journey. So awesome to have you guys with us. Essentially, Nick touched on it before, but it's looking at how a restorative economy can be developed in New Zealand. And so we developed a partnership with Green Wave in the US, which is an charitable organization that looks to apply a multi-species or multi-trophic farming model. And we're looking at how can you take that and bring it to New Zealand. And I guess through that process, we're looking through the process of adapting to a local context. We're looking at who are the key partners here. How are you going to bring product to market? How does iwi fit in, or how do Māori fit in, and can they play a really important role here? And so we've been co-developing and socialising this project with them for some time now. And I guess where we ended up was that in a multi-species aquaculture context, seaweed farming, which is a core element of the US model, is completely absent from New Zealand. And so the supply chain is completely immature. And we've decided, we've gone down this pathway of developing a pilot, which is a full supply stream element, where you look at the hatchery production of seaweed product, what you do in terms of farming it in the ocean, and then also on the processing side, which Aotearoa can touch on later. It's kind of that we've taken a market-led approach. How do you actually implement these things in New Zealand and ground it in real economics? So we're quite excited and embarrassed about that project. There's some really clear benefits to farming seaweed in the marine space. You've got the opportunity to control nutrients, the coastal environment, things like nitrogen and phosphorus, through the uptake of through the seaweed uptake of those nutrients. You've also got the potential for carbon drawdown with seaweeds, and so we've got a whole work stream out dedicated looking at how that actually works. If you were to try and sequester that stuff permanently, how would you go about it, and how can you actually develop a pathway to market and for these credits? And then there's all sorts of other ones there as well. You've got your food sovereignty elements. You've got whether or not you can sell that product into the agricultural sector, into food sectors, whatever it might be. There's also other benefits that you can see on mussel farms in particular, including biodiversity. So it's pretty well known up this way. If you go fishing around the mussel farm, you're going to haul up bucket loads of snapper. And so some of these benefits that we get through the multi-species farming approach, we're looking to essentially qualify and quantify those and communicate it in the context of this BREMO project. So the pilot project will hopefully verify a whole lot of assumptions that we have, and that will be taking place over the next few years. I'll touch on one more before I hand over to AOC. So we're also doing a really cool project with iwi and Aotearoa in the Bay of Plenty, looking at potential aquaculture opportunities for them. They through the treaty settlement process, they are in line to potentially receive a large chunk of water space, and they need to be able to make decisions in an informed manner, so that they've asked us to really explore different aquaculture investment propositions, and particularly through, and we've been asked to do that through a well-being lens. So taking an opportunity and assessing it through the environmental, the social, the economic and the cultural, to kind of present this holistic picture of what this could deliver for Bay of Plenty communities, for the environment. Essentially, we're renting space from Tangaroa. How can we demonstrate Paetiakatanga? We have these huge aspirations about what they want to be, and Nick Lewis touched on it just before, how the Māori are looking to be leaders and already are leaders in the blue economy space. So it's a really exciting project where we're taking a long-term view of what economic development could look like in the Bay of Plenty. And so we can position each of these proposals through a different lens. You know, it might be stronger on the economic side, but does that come at the cost of your cultural, or does that come at the cost of the environmental? And so by presenting a range of different lenses over that, we can really drive we can, as I said before, seek a pragmatic solution that meets the needs of the iwi, and that is a stepwise process to achieving that. Hopefully that's just a really quick overview of a few projects that we're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Fraser. Super impressed again. I think in the marine environment it's really hard to do work, but on the other hand, that really forces us to develop new partnerships as well. And seeing that the efforts through the Sustainable Science Challenge, that we're already starting straight from the start, bringing in those new business models, looking at the regenerative approach and the food security, plus the circular economy right from the start, is actually really, really exciting. And I'm even more excited, and it's my pleasure to introduce now our next speakers, Tane and Claire, who are the second generation of family members to support and run AgriSea New Zealand, Seaweed Limited, a family-owned company that was invented by Tane's mothers way back in 1996. AgriSea New Zealand is an award-winning sustainable New Zealand company specializing in manufacture of macroalgal concentrates and bioactive extractions to add high-value nutrition for soil, plant, animal and human health. Tane and the AgriSea team continue to develop new products and sustainable industrial practices. His business was recognized in the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge program of New Zealand. Tane and Claire, welcome.
Good everyone. Great to be here this evening.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Great to be with you this evening. So we're a pleasure of ours to sit and join with you tonight. I think we're just going to start off our presentation with a short video. Big thanks to the Sustainable Seas actually for giving us a call and coming and filming this video very early one morning. I forgot to to do my hair that day, so I have to excuse me.
When we started, it was in response to people asking for our seaweed. You know, we'd give some to friends and they'd use it on their gardens and find it was pretty good. And then friends would tell friends. So really we just decided, do we want to brew for other people or not? So we sold the kids' inheritance, moved out to the beautiful Hauraki Plains and lived in the back of a shop with no running water. Well, no running hot water, no shower, no nothing. We were the filthiest people in Paeroa. And then, of course, once we were set up, farmers started coming in and horticulturists. So that started another complete different phase, a phase where we focused very much on research. And once we began brewing for people for whom their land is their living, that was an entirely different cup of tea. We had to research the efficacy on these monocultural commercial growing systems. You become educated, you know, you learn heaps about soil health, you know, and how, wow, if we have healthy soil, we sure don't need the chemicals. We do not need the chemicals.
We work with a range of partners for research and development, funding from Callaghan Innovation, working with Auckland University, Waikato University, Lincoln University, Wintech, Plant and Food Research, PCTI, the list kind of goes on. We're really collaborative and open and wanting to really share knowledge to develop the knowledge that our country has. I think for years probably seaweed's been a little bit undervalued and probably poo-pooed in a lot of situations. So it's really exciting now meeting scientists who love seaweed. We're like, oh yes, you know, you guys are awesome. And it's validating what we've been doing for 25 odd years. Makes us feel fantastic, that we're not the only weirdos out there doing something with seaweed, so that's cool. The blue economy is making sure first and foremost we look after our ecological resources and our oceans, but secondly, being able to extract value from them. So making sure that we can actually make good businesses that are sustainable, but first and foremost looking after the resource that's sustainable too.
Seaweed of course comes up on our beaches, it's collected sustainably by our harvesters. We never take all of the seaweed. They'll clean, dry, put it into fadges for us where it gets shipped up to Paeroa here, and from here our guys go about the quality control checking. We mill it down, specifically depending on which brew we're doing, and then from there our brewers take care of it and skim and stir it every day, up to 3 months. And then, there's a little bit in between that I can't tell you about in regards to the secret herbs and spices, but that happens throughout the whole 3 months there. There actually is a lot within it. It's not simply grabbing a bit of seaweed from the beach, chucking in an old drum, forgetting about it, and voila.
Sustainability for us starts from the beach, right through to the barrel for our products, right through to the farmers that we spend time with. I look at how it's trendy to be sustainable, you know, and that word is just, you know, for us it's a lived reality. It's not something that's academic kind of a thing, it's a lived reality. If it's not sustainable, we won't do it. You know, we won't do it. A successful business and respect for the environment are not mutually exclusive.
Time he would spend his weekends walking along the beach and gathering seaweed to turn into a range of products that are used Like I said, primarily in the agricultural industry, we've developed products that help reduce urine nitrogen in dairy cows, which we have 7 papers being published currently, through to biostimulants and helping farmers transition to a more agroecological approach to farming. In the early 2000s, the government earmarked 7, and it's now 9 species of seaweed for commercial interest. The idea of seaweed going into the quota management system sent shivers, absolute shivers down in our spine. We had researched the effects of seaweed extraction in other countries and the near collapse of giant kelp along California. We firmly believe that the quota management as it stands is not the right vehicle for what we call up there as a rainforest of the sea. So our family completely funded, was about 8 years in the end, a piece of research to really set both a precedent of the sort of research that needs to happen before you consider cutting seaweed, but also to try and stop it heading into the quota management system as it stood.